How'd you do your leg?
I tore my ACL and my MCL at football.
Oh, God, football. Well, at least it was something you were doing.
Just something fun, right? Rather than just walking to Tesco's. Yeah. This is The Mental Ledge. Conversations at the edge of human potential, exploring resilience, healing, reinvention, creativity, and the psychology behind building a meaningful life. Founder of Sushi, YOTEL, ex-Dragon on Dragon's Den. So happy to have you on today. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure to be here, Emma.
I'd love to start with this question. What did 45-year-old Simon understand that 25-year-old Simon didn't?
45 years old was when I started Sushi. And I don't think, a lot of people say that at 25 you think you know everything. I don't think I did think I knew everything. I was a sort of out there hippie. I'd been in prison when I was 19. I'd been a roadie, and I used to peace signs and mean them. Had long hair, and I was just drifting along. Really, I wasn't doing very much at that point. It was soon after that I got going.
That's really interesting because I think a lot of people that go through their 20s with a sort of let's go with the flow then seem to regret it later on. But from what you said and what I've listened to and read about you, I don't think you have. I think you really valued those times of kind of having a wild life before getting to the sort of entrepreneurial stage later.
Yeah, I don't think I left school when I was, I was actually 17. I always say I was 16 because it sounds better, but I left school young and I didn't have any qualifications to fall back on, so I just scraped a living. And I think it was fun looking back, but it wasn't that easy either. I didn't know where I was going, and it was scary at times, I guess, not being quite sure who you are and where you are, and I had to put it back all together. And that was, it took me a long time to do it, but along the way, I did. We go a bit beyond 25, and we get going a bit.
And do you see that as all part of the journey to get to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, look, whatever you go through is you, isn't it? We're a product of our genetics, of being very young and how your character is formed, and then the experiences you have along your life. And I was at that age, I was a rebel without a clue, and on I went, and I started learning, and you learn and you learn and you learn. And I suppose by the time I got to 45, I had some small businesses. I'd learned an awful lot, so mine was a learning process. I don't think I was overconfident when I was young. It took me a long time to build that confidence.
And do you think did you kind of run with your intuition at that point, or did you try to be pragmatic about figuring things out? What was your sort of MO?
I've never been a process-driven person. I've always, I've discovered as I've got older that I need people around me who are process-driven and who work things out rationally and reasonably and all of that. I've always followed my gut feeling on pretty much everyone and everything. And, proof of the pudding, it's worked out pretty good for me. One of the things I do, and I think I've always done, is I call it sort of imagined hindsight. I try to sort of look into the future and sort of imagine what is going to happen, and measure things out against that. I do research. That's what I do. I do research. I get to know a subject really well, and then I make gut instinct. You might call it educated instinct.
Okay. And I think I saw somewhere that you tend to give things a bit of a trial period as well. I think maybe 3 months, you'd said. Is that part of that sort of research?
That's something I learnt along the way. Was 3-month periods are quite good, because it's a manageable period of time. And when you're thinking of doing something new, to set yourself 3 months to go out and do the research and ban your brain from deciding whether you're going to do it or whether you're not going to do it. 3-second rule, 1, 2, 3, right, that's it, stop thinking about that, just get on with the research. And 3 months is a good period of time because it's a bit of a mnemonic, but it's nearly 100 days. So, if you just 1%, it doesn't seem so overwhelming if you just sort of say 1% a day, and at the end of that 3 months you have 100% more learning, and then you're in my sort of way, my educated instinct is in a better position to make good decisions.
That makes a lot of sense. And is that how Sushi sort of kicked off? I know there was a serendipitous meeting, but then did you give it that 3 month?
Yeah,
kind of
I set out that 3 months, and at the end of that 3 months, that sort of negative voice in the back of my head, which was sort of going, if this is a good idea, somebody would have done this years ago. Sort of dried up, and I had another voice that was waking me up in the morning going, you're going to be very successful and very rich and very famous. But fortunately, I've been sort of around long enough by that time to realize that the negative voice, which was just there, the positive voice is just as big a delusion as the negative voice, and somewhere in between the two is a sensible person who gets things done.
And who do you let drive the car, so to speak? I think there's an author that talks about which kind of inner voice you let actually drive the car and which can be a passenger. How do you balance those voices?
I don't think I've ever been very good at balance. One thing I have discovered is that it is more important to make decisions. Mostly, and look, there's an opposite to everything, but mostly it's more important to make decisions and keep on moving and doing things, because you can always change your mind and do something different. And if there's one thing I've been accused of over the years, it's you're always changing your mind, Simon. And actually, they're absolutely right. And often I wish that politicians would, when the journalist comes down on them and says, but 2 years ago you said this. And they go, oh, no, I didn't. But I said this. He said, no. What they ought to be saying is, absolutely, I changed my mind. I'm just like a normal person. I get influenced by other people, and I change my mind. So I changed my mind. In business, once you commit to something and you're doing something, there are a lot of cases where you don't want to change your mind at all, because it gets to be very expensive changing your mind. But in the early stage of something, I'll absolutely chop and change till I get it right. And if for some instinctively I feel something's not right, I'll try and deal with it there and then and change early. Quit and cut bait, change early, do something as early as possible. That is something I've learned. Reach deep into your pocket, where you might sort of know what's ahead, and if there's something that's worrying you, deal with it. Don't put it to one side. Don't put it under the carpet. Deal with things early.
And is that part of the reason Sushi was such a success that it's been? How can you take us through sort of the journey of that?
Well, Sushi. I left school when I was 16, 17, and ended up in North Sea Camp, which was a detention centre. I got busted for drugs, and I think it was a sort of public schoolboy. You can tell me I'm a public schoolboy with a slightly posh accent here, bit transatlantic, one hopes, by this stage. Anyway, they made a bit of an example of me, and I did that, and then I came out and I was lost in the wilderness, and I got a job working in theatre. In the very early days of Fringe Theatre, and I absolutely loved it. And then I went to work at Richmond Theatre and the Royal Court, and then rock and roll sort of was starting to come along, and the early days of touring shows. And if you knew your stage left from your stage right, you were an expert in rock and roll. And I went out on the road doing lighting for one of the very early lighting companies for people like the Moody Blues and the Jethro Tulls, even the Rolling Stones, and later Rod Stewart and Elton, all these people. As really as a roadie, and putting the lights up. And when I got the chance, I'd tell these bands that they ought to be doing big shows like, Busby Berkeley did for the movies of the 1920s, big spectacles. They go, no, man, no, none of that, this is rock and roll, and that's show business, and never the twain shall meet. And of course, after a while, they listened to me, and one way or another, I got a big break, and I became a stage designer. Actually, I got a big break because Rod Stewart, by this time I'd started a small lighting company, which was the first proper enterprise I did with a guy called Ricky Farr. And Rod Stewart, he got the job to do the sound of Rod Stewart, and I got the job to do the lighting. It was a very lucky break, really. And Rod's first ever tour, really, the first ever big tour. Rod wanted a big white stage. He knew show business, and I could draw, and I'd driven the van for Richmond Theatre, so I knew where to get all the drapes and the rostrums and this, that, and the other. And I did a design and took it in to show him and his manager, Billy Gaff. And Rod said, "Well, if it can travel, I love it. It's just what I've always wanted." And the next thing I knew, I was a stage designer, and I saw nobody else was doing it in those days, and I had the clear patch to myself for a few years. And I was doing all these big rock shows as a stage designer. I remember going to a dinner one night, and people said, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a stage designer." Suddenly I'd become something. I'd acted as if, and I became something. And that was a serendipitous and fortunate thing that happened. But as a result, as you say, because I put myself out there and stood up and said, "Say yes, say yes," was a big. I remember that was a little saying I had in my head. If somebody gives you an option, always say yes, even if it's out of you feel it's above your pay grade or you're out of your depth. And that's what I did. And I made some mistakes. We made a lot of mistakes in the very early days of touring rock shows. Really difficult, lots and lots of problems, lots of things going wrong in different countries of the world. But and when I look back, it was a wonderful, exciting time. But I think at the time it was like, oh my God, how are we going to put this far out? How are we going to deal with this? And they rate pop stars sometimes, and sometimes very, very happy pop stars. So he's a genius, Simon. We love him. He's really made my show. So it was a roller coaster. It was a hell of a roller coaster ride. And certainly, the book I've just written, Yo Man, which is out in June, where you'll probably be broadcasting it by then. That's got a lot of those stories in there about that period of my life. Before we ever got to Yo. So and of course, I learnt being in show business is not so different from starting restaurants, which is the first business I did with Yo. And they got their first nights and their rehearsals and all of that stuff, and it's got a lot in common, really. So I learnt an awful lot about that. And then later, after that rock and roll business, before Yo Sushi, I was in the television business, selling television rights to rock shows. I knew the managers of the groups, and there I learnt international business and contracts and all of that sort of stuff. So I had the two. I had the creative part and the businessy bit. And I was lucky to have both those, learnt, but not in university or out of a book, but in the School of Hard Knocks. That's where I learned.
And did that give you the confidence to kind of go from the entertainment industry into entrepreneurship, knowing all those skills were transferable?
Yeah, I mean, you're dead right. That's exactly what it is. Most businesses are the same in many ways, that skills are transferable. Whether I had the confidence or whether I just had the chutzpah and the bravado to go and give it a go, or whether, out of pure desperation, if I didn't, something worse was going to happen. So I was willing to take the risk. I think all of that stuff was in there. If you were to analyse what got me up and got me out and going, but certainly I learnt an awful lot from the things that went wrong. And somehow I got away with it, and obviously had lots of successes as well. But there were equal number of things that didn't go well. You learn much more when things don't go well. It's not very good at the time, but you do learn an awful lot more. And I'll not do that again. I'll not make that mistake again. And I think I was willing to. I think probably one of the advantages I had is I was willing to look at myself and take responsibility on, and I was never a blamer. I remember reading somewhere that one of the great secrets of life is that that you don't blame other people, that you take complete and utter responsibility for anything that happens, even if somebody does you in or behaves really badly to you. It's your own fault for getting involved with them in the first place. And I think once you do take that ultimate responsibility for everything, and not blame people, even when they're to blame, actually, and not blame and not try and trip people up, all of which I've done in my time. When you do take that, life is difficult, and business is difficult. Everything's difficult. Actually, business in some ways is quite simple, but life is difficult, and people are difficult, and when you actually truly accept that life is difficult, you stop complaining.
And has that awareness developed because of those experiences over the years? Has your philosophy evolved because of the challenges and the hurdles? And I'm assuming a load of self-doubt probably came up at certain times. How did you approach that, and how has that shaped you?
Well, I didn't have an easy childhood, one way or another. I had a controlling dad and emotional mum. And, it wasn't their fault, but one way or another, it wasn't that easy. And so when I came out, I had to figure out, how to get through life without a lot of training, you might say, which generally you get at school. Also leaving school young, being a rebel at school and leaving school very young, I didn't get that training. A few self-improvement courses in the early days of the 70s when those things started to come out helps, and a bit of therapy along the years helped as well. But I think I definitely learned from the school of hard knocks. I learned from making lots and lots of mistakes, and not behaving well all the time, and having to look and realizing that one should always look at oneself and not somebody else. And that's where I think, a lot of this thing about success, whatever that means, because it's not just about making money. It's, certainly making some money is a good thing to do because it takes away the daily sweat and worry and anxiety about money. It doesn't necessarily make you happy. But yeah, that's what I think about it. But you can have a very simple life, and I've talked to people who've got really relatively simple lives, don't earn a great deal of money, go on holiday and stay in hostels, not in hotels, and when I compare with them, when I have an honest conversation and compare with them what my level of happiness is and what their level of happiness is, often if somebody's done that right, they're just as happy, so they're just as successful. So anybody listening who thinks you've got to go out and be a big businessman or make a hit record to be happy and successful is not true. Success can come at all sorts of different levels, and I've always said that. And there have been times when I thought I'm going. After I got divorced, actually, before I went to live in Chamonix in the French Alps, and I thought I'm going to give the whole thing up, always trying hard to be Mr. Success. And I'm just going to, I had enough money in the value of the flat. My flat had gone up to buy a tiny little apartment in Chamonix. I thought I'll just rent it out and go and stay with a mate and have a simple life climbing and skiing, because I was a climber and a skier and a sailor. And eventually I thought, I can't, there's too much grit in my oyster thinking I want to go out and be somebody. So I came back to London and started is what actually happened.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that was sort of the launch pad.
Could have gone the other way. I could have been just living in the mountains, living a simple life, being a ski instructor or something. But I didn't. I came back and I went for it, and my ambition and dream paid off. And that's what happened, I think.
That's really interesting, because I think sometimes when we do just kind of release the inner pressure to be something or achieve something, and even just being in nature, being in the mountains, I think can give us that reset to then have that kind of blank canvas to move into that next chapter. Is that what you felt sort of happened?
Yeah, I think anybody listening here who is thinking of giving up a day job or starting something of their own, or indeed as you have, Emma. I mean, we were chatting just before I came on air with you, and you were saying that you felt the overwhelming need, having done podcasts before, to come back and really do one again, and here you are doing it. So that sometimes there is an inner voice that says, I'm going to give it a go. And I was talking to somebody earlier today, actually, who's much younger. He's 23 and he's starting something, and he wanted my advice. And I tried. When I was knocking on people's doors, I always said if I ever got successful, I would always try and make time for people who wanted some help or advice or whatever. And this 23-year-old, and I said, actually, you should just totally go for it. He said, should I try and raise money? It's difficult to raise money at that on a very small level like that. He said, "Or should I bootstrap it?" I said, "Bootstrap it. Put everything in, borrow as much as you possibly can, run up your credit cards, all the things that probably the careers advisor would tell you not to do, and give it a go and see if you can get it off, because you're young enough that and he was a clever guy, two of them, and they were clever guys, and if things had gone wrong, they'd have found a way to save up and pay the debt back and get on and have another stage of your life. And if I'd started that young, I didn't really. I mean, I had lots of small businesses, but I didn't start YOTEL. I was 45, and if I'd done that much earlier, if I'd done it 20 years earlier, I'd probably be Richard Branson, because it was in that period, or another Richard Branson, which is I always kind of aspired to be, and I'm not. I'm a me version, a smaller version of that in terms of total turnover and everything, but yeah, that's I think the earlier you start, the better. And people listening, I never met the person who went out to do what they really dreamed of doing and regretted it, regardless of whether they succeeded or failed. But I met lots of people who sort of looked back from much later in life and said, "I wish I'd put my head above the parapet and given it a go." Which I can see Emma's head nodding here and being able to relate to that.
Yeah. What's that quote, isn't it, of you regret the things you don't do
versus
what you do. Do you strongly agree with that based on your experiences?
I don't know. I'm very fortunate in some ways. Well, at least I always profess to have a really bad memory. Actually, I can remember certain things. When I'm on the ball, I can really remember. There's lots of stuff I have forgotten. So I do tend to live in the present. And I don't really, thinking of them now, obviously one or two come in your mind, but really I don't have any regrets. It's worked out pretty good for me. And I don't have any regrets, and I haven't always been perfect by any means. My behaviour's not even been great at times, but I don't really. Sometimes that's what needed. I was at one time in my life. I found out much later when I was in the TV business. Somebody used to call me the steamroller, and it was probably pretty true. But there are times when being a steamroller at the beginning of something can work pretty good. I've always said, what's the word? Complete control over something. So almost Machiavellian is not the right word, but total dictatorship at the outset of something, an obsessive no work-life balance at the beginning of something is a very good way to be. But the sooner you can get off that platform and allow other people to help you and do things their way, the better. But at the beginning, one person's view. I mean, Steve Jobs is the best example of it, really. He was a complete some people said he was an absolute bastard, but it depends what that word means. But it was his way or the highway. I want this done by 5 o'clock, that's it, finished, or you're out, sort of thing. And it worked very well for him, and he got things done, because he had a real vision, and he got people to follow him as a result of that, because they wanted to be part of it. And he'd go, well, you can't argue. I'm making you a lot of money. I'm making everybody a lot of money, so just do what I say, And there have been times that I've been like that. Later, you have to share.
I guess on that note, and going back to something you said earlier, what does the definition of success mean to you?
Well, okay. I'm not very good at or even terribly interested in kind of analysing things and working them out. But I do. One thing I did, it's a bit personal set. But I remember having a vasectomy, which is where and the doctor. I was asking the doctor about how we get created, and the whole thing about the sperms and all that. And I said, at the point of your creation, how many sperms were there? And he said. He looked at me over his glasses and he said, between 30 and 40 million of them. And I said, so I won the race to get there. If somebody else another sperm had got there before me, would it have still been me? And he pulled his glasses down over and looked down at me and he said, no. So I was 1 in 40 million. I had a 1 in 40 million chance. That's a very, very low chance of success to get a chance at this life. And I reckon that's good enough. That's a good enough reason just to live this life and to do it as best as you can, because you might well not have had the chance at all. And so is everybody listening. You are the lucky sperms, to put it crudely. You are the lucky ones. So make the blooming most of it that you possibly can is the way I see it. And I think success is becoming the person that you want to be, actually. I didn't know I was going to say that, but I think it's sort of becoming the person that it's a constant work in progress for me to try and get to be a better and better person in every respect, in terms of capability of how you deal with people, how, what you contribute to the world, all of those things. And I think if you end up, I'm on my second wife. I was a serial monogamist, I think, so something like that. But I'm on my second wife, who's Thai. We live in Thailand quite a lot of the year. And they have some very good sayings over there, one of which is don't think too much, i.e. don't analyze everything. And I once asked her, I said, in one of my more loving moments, I said, if I was dying, if I got a sort of terminal illness, I just want to be with you, really. I don't need anybody else. You're enough for me. And I said, what about you? She said, nah, don't need anybody. I'm comfortable with myself. And I thought, you've got that right, actually. You've got that right.
And in a world of distractions where we're sort of told in various forms to strive to be somebody else and strive to have external things, I think that's a really powerful message.
That, as I've got older, that's, background noise in my head, which I always used to describe as a dangerous neighborhood, my head has got much quieter. And the earlier you can get that kind of whatever you call it, peace in your mind, that you can just be comfortable and sit there and not have lots and lots and lots going on. The better decisions you make for a kickoff, the more comfortable you are with yourself. So I think somewhere in there, they're all words and descriptions, but somewhere in there, there's a lesson to be learned about what success is, But success doesn't have to be at a high level. It doesn't have to be big cars. Certainly, one of the things that I've always done when I haven't had money, I've been right down on my uppers, running out of money before the end of the week in my time. One of the things that I've always done is to try and live within my means, and really just not spend money when I'm starting something up, and not feel that I've got to have this, and not buy, even when I've made money, not buy things for status. And in fact, even today, I try not to have too much, because you got to, make some money. You can have this. I've had yachts and polo ponies and the whole bit, but you just have. Life just gets too complicated, and so to live quite lightly is another way of being successful. I think move quite lightly through life, not have hundreds of possessions. I've got I think I have no possessions that I'd really mind losing. The whole line of, it's got sentimental value. I don't really have that. But I do respect that other people are collectors and love to have things that they collect over their lives that furnish their houses. I'm just much lighter in that respect.
I think there's a freedom to that, isn't there? That you can own things, but they can own you too.
Yeah. It's a bit monkish, but I quite like that.
Yeah, I think there's a truth in it. So I guess sort of following on from what you've been saying there, both on the monetary side of things and the more philosophical side of things, reflecting on everything, what comes to mind is the 5% things that almost threatened everything, and the 5% things that actually you're really proud of and you feel catalyzed getting where you are now.
But 5% of the time, certainly when I was starting Yeoing in the early days, first 5 years, probably 10 years, was just sort of, terror of things going wrong, and financial things especially. Once you're, starting those businesses is like building a pack of cards. What am I proud of? I'm proud of lots of things. When I look back at all the rock shows that I did in the 70s and the 80s, one after the other, all the way up to Live Aid was one of the last things I was involved in, or my design studio was anyway. And I'm proud of lots of those things. I think opening Yo Sushi, I was planning to open Yo Sushi at the end of 1 year, And eventually it took me 2 years living on a pittance with my money running down. And that was in Poland Street in Soho. And it was a big, big site. It was no small restaurant. It was £1 million restaurant. And I managed to raise the money. And actually, I managed to raise the money and keep 90% of the business. The day we opened, I owned 90% of the business. I had a lot of bills to pay off. But I did own 90% of the business. And, I'm quite how I pulled that off. I'm still not quite sure. But I did. And nobody came in the first week. And the second week, we had a queue down the block. And it lasted for years. And the money was rolling in. And as I used to say, we're looking back at it, as I say in my book, Yo Man, which is my new memoir, the money was rolling in and I was running the business. So the money was rolling right back out again. And that's when I did get the professionals in who really knew how to do those things.
And what did your lowest period teach you that success never could?
I had several low periods, actually. Once when I left school, what the hell am I doing? Once when I, in 1985, when I got out of the music business and I was in the wilderness, what the hell am I doing? Once when I got out of the television business, what's going to happen now? I'm going to run out of money. And, those were the low points. And getting divorced around about that time, just before I started Yo. They were low points when I thought my life could have gone badly wrong. And when I look back at it, my life could have gone badly wrong. I often wonder, well, I don't often wonder, but I have wondered what would have happened if that first restaurant in Poland Street in Soho in 1997 hadn't worked. I often wonder, would I have been able to dust myself off and get up and start again? And I don't know the answer to that question. I suspect it could have gone both ways. I could have been quite a sort of happy, unhappy person, bitter person, or a survivor, or maybe I would have done. I don't know. I just simply don't know. But as it happened, it worked out. So I'm happy, and I think I'm a sort of good and inspirational example, possibly, to anybody wanting to start up. Because if it works out for me, I'm not that clever. I'm an ordinary Joe in many ways, and if it works out for me, it can work out for anybody if they really put themselves on the line.
And on that note, if you were starting again today, you're back to 25-year-old Simon. It's 2026. Yeah. You've managed to scrape together, let's say, £1,000. Yeah. You want to make sure you're not in that position of vulnerability financially. What do you do?
What if I started again with £1,000? I always thought there should be a sort of game show or a TV show about that. You're given £1,000 stock. I suppose there probably are things like that. No. I mean, I was lucky that it was less regulated in those days. I think I'll try and turn the 1,000 into 10,000 for a kickoff by running up debt and by working my proverbial bollocks off to do whatever it took to increase that amount of money, or to learn a new area, go and work in a new area and do something and save every penny. And, hopefully my creative mind would kick in, ideas. There's a poem by a guy I'm very fond of quoting called Felix Dennis. And the first line is, ideas, we've had 'em since Eve first met Adam, but take it from me, execution's the key. Meaning, it doesn't really matter what you do, you just got to do something. It doesn't have to be a super creative, super clever thing. And then he goes on to say, good fortune. The truth is, the harder you work, the more that you sweat, the luckier you get, which is what I'm talking about. He says, what does he go on to say after that? He says, the money, go find a likely investor to get what you need, you toadies to greed. And we live in an age when you can raise money, it's possible. The talent, go find it, but first wine and dine it. It's tedious work with a talented jerk. To win it, you've got to be in it, but never be late to quit and cut bait. Expansion is vanity. Profit is sanity. Overhead begs for people, and it walks on two legs. The first step, just do it and bluff your way through it. Remember to duck, Godspeed and good luck. And I'm telling you that poem because it's kind of it's a simple way of looking at how, if you want to look it up, it's called How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis. And he also wrote a book, a very good book called How to Get Rich, which is one of the books that I've always sort of put a lot of store by. But he also wrote this poem called How to Get Rich, which kind of says it all.
I'm so impressed you know that by heart. That's that's an amazing poem. Thanks for sharing it. And what are you still hungry to create?
I mean, even though I was an investor in Dragon's Den, and I have had various investments in things that haven't been I can pretty truthfully say, not completely, but most of them haven't done very well. I've never been a great investor, so I'm not, and now I don't really want to invest. I want to have a good life, and I think that my main thrust at the moment, I've had two big hit records, if you like, Sushi and YOTEL, which is a much bigger business than Sushi. It's 35 big hotels around the world, both of which I'm still the licensor, if you like. I earn a royalty from them, and that's financed really all the other projects. And I've lost a fair bit of money on quite a few other things along the way, but that's finance that allowed that to happen. So now I actually started doing social media and doing podcasts like this as a way of promoting and selling more copies of first of all, the Book of Yo, which is my first book, and now Yo Man, which is the book coming out. And I did it to do that because I wanted the book to be successful, not to make loads of money particularly, but I'd like lots and lots of books to be out there for people to read. And what I've discovered in the last 18 months doing that is that the real joy has come from helping people, which sounds terribly altruistic, but it's quite selfish in a way because, people ask my advice, which I love, and I've got a good instinct for knowing what people should do at different points of their life and knowing what they're like. And I also know that success, for the most part, in business, if you want to sort of stay in business and not go out of business, is about getting your head in the right place. If you can get, calm and get a vision for what you want to do and get your head in the right place and be a good leader and have people respect and look up to you and want to follow you and want to help and do things with you and for you, you've got that is more important than the developing the product, the putting the fires of everyday life out, of raising the money, finding the right people to employ. All of those things all emanate from being the person that you want to be. And I think that's really what I've been able to help people with is for the most part, is becoming the right person, but also the practical side of how do you get things done and what's the right direction to do and how do you get yourself ready to do an exit, because the purpose of building a business really is, you're only borrowing, even if you created it yourself, it's only on loan to you for your particular span of your tenure of running it, because if you're anything like me, you'll want to be on to the next thing. So you're always looking for an exit or somebody else to take it out and do the boring part, which is roll it out over a much longer period of time, or at least the bit that I find boring.
And I guess coming up to the last few questions, I think we're coming up to an hour-ish, 10, 20 minutes left. There's several questions that come to mind, actually. One is, have you noticed sort of repeatable or identifiable traits in people that, and you can answer this any way you want, because I think it comes back to the definition of success. We can say people that are business successful, but also people that maybe are just happy and genuinely content.
No, they're a good way of putting the question. Well, in terms of the sort of business side of it, honestly, I think one of the most attractive qualities in people is enthusiasm. And I've always said to people, the trick, whether you're starting out as a 16-year-old or further on in your life, is to over-deliver to everybody, whether that be your customer, your employer, your person you're consulting for, is always to over-deliver and not be thinking, am I getting ripped off? Am I getting, not be thinking about what you're getting out of it, but to over-deliver it to others. Because I know that when people do that to me, I just want to do everything I possibly can for them and to keep them, So over-delivery is a really important quality. And I think that's I was trying to think of. I had another one in the back of my mind as we were going, but it's gone out of my head now. Over delivery. Don't know. It'll come back. Do me another question, and I'll see if I can remember what I was thinking.
We'll come back at 2 in the morning.
Exactly.
What was your mental ledge moment? A time in your life when you knew that you were either going to turn back down the mountain, or you're going to have to put on the backpack and continue to climb, as arduous as it may be?
The 2 years it took me, I was going to start Sushi in 1 year, as I said, and the 2 years that it took me to open Sushi, I've always thought of them when I look back as halcyon years. I knew exactly what I had to do. There was no way out. That was it. I was going to start Sushi because otherwise I'd lose everything, So I knew exactly where I was going on that mountain. So once you know the way, that is half the course. And I got up every morning and I jumped out of bed. And I jumped out of bed not because I wanted to be rich and famous. I jumped out of bed because I didn't want to lose everything and be poor. Much better motivation. So that's when I thought there's no turning back. So yeah, that's I would say. And then it goes on with every project I've ever done from there on in. But I am a mountaineer, and I know this very deeply, actually, from being in the mountains, and I'm a sailor as well. I've crossed the Pacific Ocean in a sailboat, and I've done a lot of things. But, you've got to know when to turn back, and certainly on a mountain, any good mountaineer will tell you that, knowing when you've got to be gunning for the top, you've got to have absolute determination. But as Felix Dennis says in that poem, never be late to quit and cut bait. And I've done that several times. I was several £1 million into developing YoHome, and it just got out of hand, and I pulled out of it. And it was absolutely the right thing to do when I look back at it. And in fact, YOTEL then went on and did YOTEL pads, which have been quite successful, and in fact were probably better than my concept, I have to admit. But there's lots of reasons not to give up when you're that far in, ego, what you've told people. But everybody just always forgets anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, knowing when to quit and cut bait and just get on with the next thing. And I've had lots of things like that haven't happened.
I have to ask,
yes.
What was your best sailing adventure?
What was my best sailing adventure? Well, my dad taught us to sail when we were children. He was in the army, and we were stationed in Germany near the Dutch border, so we learnt as kids. I used to hate it. There was the wooden boats, and your hands got freezing, and he was army, so you had to lace up these covers and everything. And as soon as I got a bit older, and I thought, what should I do this weekend? You think, okay, let's go sailing. Let's go rent a little boat with some mates and go sailing. And of course, I got to be the skipper, and I loved being the skipper. I've always liked being the leader. Somebody said to me once, they accused me of being of not being a team player. And I said, when have I ever been a team player? I'm definitely a leader. That's the semantics to that. But sailing-wise, I did lots of sailing over the years, and then once Sushi and YOTEL were up and running and being run by other people, and I'd let go and let them, which is what I'm professing that you need to do eventually, I said, I'm going sailing. And everybody said, oh, well, good luck, have a good time. And they wouldn't miss me, and I didn't miss them, and I left them to get on with it. It was exactly the right thing to do. And I bought a boat in Panama, a 57-foot catamaran, and with 3 friends, I sailed it across the Pacific. I sailed it all the way to Fiji, nearly to Australia. And then we brought it back via South America and sold it in America. So that was a hell of a thing. And that took 2.5 years. I met a girl on the way and ended up living in Tahiti for 5 years. Well, I say I lived in Tahiti. I was backwards and forwards to that. Met a Tahitian girl. So yeah, that was a hell of a thing to do, and that was a dream I'd always had, to go ocean sailing. And actually, that had been my fallback plan. If it had all gone wrong, I was going to go and buy a little 25-foot boat and go sailing on my own and sail around the world. And I could have been pretty happy. Not as happy as I am now, but I think I would have been okay with that.
That's quite a small boat. I used to have a 23-foot boat, and it's quite.
Maybe it would have been a 30-foot boat now.
That's that would have been quite the adventure, but you've had so many adventures.
But people do that. I've met people sailing across the Pacific. I remember meeting these Swedish kids when iPhones had just come out, and in my day you had to learn how to use a sextant and this, that, and the other, and they were just navigating on their iPhones, and they were having a brilliant time. 4 of them just sailing a little 30-foot boat. They sailed it all the way from Sweden, and they were sailing around the world. Sailing across oceans is not very difficult. Sailing near land and rocks is very difficult. You have to be very, very careful. But people do that, and there is a big community of people sailing around the world. And, some pretty happy people as well. Some fucked up people, but some pretty happy people as well.
Maybe 2 of the same kind.
Yeah.
I think it sort of brings you back to basics and sort of the basic human nature that we all have, getting out of civilized society, so to speak, and being more in harmony with.
Well, that is true, and there's a lot of talk about it with iPhones and everything. I love nature, I really do. And where we live in Thailand, we're way out in the sticks in the jungle, but we got a flat in town as well. So I always say it's 5-star or a tent is where I'm happiest, but I don't really want to live in suburbia.
Yeah, I understand. That actually brings me on to my penultimate question, which is, what brings you the most joy?
Well, different at different times, but if I'm honest about it, my loving relationship brings me joy. My family has brought me joy in my time. But really, the thing that the truthful answer is that when I'm with somebody else, and we're doing something together, and we've got a project, and we're scheming it up, and we're putting it together and making it happen and getting people on board, that's a very joyful thing. It's a really, really fabulous thing to do. Or anything creative. I mean, writing the book, writing Yo Man, which I didn't take me 3 years, but I did it in bits and pieces and fits and starts. And I never set myself a discipline to write. I just wrote as I felt like it. That was very joyful to do something. And I remember I made an record album with the Blockheads after Ian Dury. Remember Ian Dury and the Blockheads? Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick. And after Ian Dury died, I made 8 songs with them, and that was very joyful to write songs and sing them. Not that I'm a very good singer, but Ian Dury wasn't a very good singer either, but he got away with it. But the creative side is what brings me joy, and doing that with interesting people and having a project that you can share with others is good.
Have you read the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert?
I have not.
She introduced me to this notion of creativity being synonymous with consciousness itself. And I think from my experience with whether it's music or art or creating a business idea, there's something in it that feels very innately spiritual in a way. And it sounds like maybe that's been the same for you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the creative thing, and a lot of people say, well, what is creativity? And it's, I think I was lucky not to have had too much schooling, because I think if you're not careful, schooling and academia can knock the creativity out of you. And so, so if you're out there, keep on daydreaming. That's where creativity comes from. It's from daydreaming and keeping your eyes open and thinking, how could something be better, or what could I do, or in case of a song, what rhymes with this or that or the other. But don't think about it too much. There's a famous line from Bob Dylan, who has accompanied me through my life in terms of, he was a singer and a wonderful songwriter. But there's this funny, stupid, probably apocryphal story that because apparently he used to just keep a notebook of all the good lines he heard, and he just put them all together and made them into a song. So everybody read some great depth into his songs, but actually they were a mishmash of words. You could make them mean whatever you wanted to. So somebody once said, "What?" The interviewer said, "What are your songs really about, Mr. Dylan?" And he said, "Well, some of them are about 3 minutes, some are about 4." And I think that's quite a good way of looking at the world, is to not to take it too seriously.
And to not be afraid to just collect what inspires you without thinking about the end product.
Absolutely. That's right. Just try things out. I'll tell you what, I've sat on my houseboat in Chelsea, which is where I lived for many years, and where I did a lot of the creative discussions and development and drawing for Sushi, YOTEL, Japan, the clothing company, YOTELs, Yo Homes, all of that. And, I've been known to, not quite often actually, to be sitting with somebody and come up with an idea to do something and get on the phone to somebody else. I know somebody who could help us with this, and get on the phone and say, we're developing a new project. We'd only thought of it 2 minutes ago, but we make it into something that's real and happening immediately. And amazing how things go from there and how fast they can move. And if it's not working, you can just stop and not do it. But most people are scared to say it because they think either somebody's going to steal their idea, which, by the way, mostly, my experience is mostly people don't steal their ideas. They've got too many good ones of their own. Or somebody's going to bust you for having said something which you then don't do. But most people will forget what you said because they're too busy thinking about what they're going to do. So, nothing to lose.
And that actually perfectly leads me on to the last question, which is, obviously, a lot of people are going through challenging times at the moment around the world. What advice would you give to someone struggling or rebuilding their life, considering cost of living, the new challenges that we have at play in terms of information overload and all the things that we're aware of that can kind of, I think, deflate people's confidence in just going for what they want and being who they are? What advice would you give to them?
I think one of the, in Japan, they don't have a word for good luck, but their equivalent saying is keep going. And I think what you have to do is to keep going. But if something's not working, don't keep doing the same things. That's a form of madness, to keep doing the same things that don't work. And live life more lightly, not what people expect of you. I've lived my life. I was lucky because my dad was in the army, so we traveled all over the world. So I never felt the need to just live in England. And today, I lived in Tahiti, as I told you, for a while. I know the South Pacific very well. I went cruising there. And I know Asia very well. In fact, I grew up for my formative years in Singapore, in old Singapore, before it was a concrete jungle. And now I live in Thailand with a Thai wife and an adopted family there as well. And, that has been a thing for me. And, Thailand, don't tell anybody, that is a sort of secret place, incredible place, really. Very, very nice culture. But I see a lot of people on my travels living all over the world, digital nomads or whatever you call them. Most people can't do it because they have a social system and a family and they've been to university and a whole group of friends and they can't do it. But, you have the choice in this day and age, in spite of visas being difficult just at the moment. That will change, to get up and go off and do whatever you want to do. And in history, that's what all the great adventurers did, and the Scottish were very good at doing that. They always used to live around the world. The British went out and did, the East India Company, whatever it was, even in the last century, we did the exported music. The Beatles went off to America and broke the doors down so that all the musicians could go out there and the bands could go out to America. Fashion we took out around the world. This country is a very creative spirit, and it's taken things all over the world. So you can do everything, And if you're having a hard time here, think about somewhere else. Or think about doing something completely different. But don't just keep on doing the same old. And my thing is, if somebody's doing something, if everybody's doing apps, do something different. Do something completely different. and learn to live off very little. Don't feel the need to have status. Don't feel the need to have lots of riches. Live very loosely and lightly, and you're a lot freer.
I think that's amazing. Simon, this has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for the stories, the wisdom, the honesty. Where can people find you, and how can people find out about your book and everything else?
You can go to yo.co.uk. That's got the sort of everything. I think my social media is at Yo Simon Woodroffe, and Yo Man the book is out. So go buy that. And I'll tell you what, you read Yo Man. It's a rollicking story, as you can imagine. It's very entertaining. And when you've finished it, read it again and then steal anything you like from me and all the places I went wrong, and don't make the same mistakes as me, but just steal the ideas. And not just me, read anybody, but steal their ideas and use them. That's the thing to do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Simon.